They called him Lefty. For a decade, he ran Las Vegas like a business, not a racket. No gun, no muscle, just numbers and a brain that could calculate odds faster than any computer. But in a city built on violence and loyalty, being the smartest guy in the room does not keep you alive. On October 4th, 1982, someone put a bomb under his Cadillac. The explosion should have killed him. It did not. The story of how Frank Rosenthal survived, thrived, and ultimately lost everything is the story of Vegas itself. Frank Lawrence Rosenthal was born on June 12, 1929 in Chicago, Illinois. Not in some mansion on the Gold Coast. Not in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. He grew up in the streets, in the bleachers, in the world where men made bets and either walked away winners or disappeared altogether. His father owned racehorses, not the Kentucky Derby kind, the kind that ran at local tracks where bookies worked the crowds and money changed hands faster than the horses ran the final stretch. Young Frank did not play baseball with the neighborhood kids. He studied racing forms. He learned odds. He watched his father calculate payouts and manage risk. And somewhere in that childhood, something clicked in his brain. Numbers made sense to Frank Rosenthal in a way that nothing else did. Not school, not sports, not the typical path that kids from Chicago were supposed to follow. He could look at a baseball game, a football match, a horse race, and see patterns that nobody else saw. He understood probability the way Mozart understood music. It was not taught. It was just there. By the time Frank was a teenager, he was already betting. Not casually, not for fun. He was calculating spreads, analyzing matchups, finding edges that professional gamblers spent lifetimes searching for. And he was winning. The Chicago outfit noticed. Of course they noticed. The outfit controlled gambling in Chicago the way they controlled everything else, with muscle, money, and a willingness to hurt anyone who got in the way. But they didn't hurt Frank Rosenthal. They recruited him. Because Frank had something they needed. Brains. Violence could intimidate. Threats could collect debts. But making real money in gambling required someone who understood the mathematics. Someone who could set lines, manage books, and ensure the house always won in the long run. Frank Rosenthal was that someone. By the 1950s, Frank was running sports betting operations for the outfit. Not officially. There were no business cards, no corporate titles. But everyone who mattered knew that if you wanted a bet placed, if you needed a line set, if you were looking for the sharpest odds in Chicago, you went to Lefty. They called him Lefty because he was left-handed. Simple as that. No deeper meaning. No mob mythology. Just a nickname that stuck. In 1961, Sports Illustrated published a profile calling Frank Rosenthal one of the greatest living experts on sports gambling. That's not mob propaganda. That's a legitimate publication recognizing a legitimate genius. Frank could have gone straight, could have worked for a casino legally, could have been a consultant or an analyst, but Frank Rosenthal didn't want legitimate. He wanted action. He wanted the thrill of operating in the shadows, the rush of beating the system, the satisfaction of being smarter than everyone else in a game where most people lost everything. And then, the law caught up with him. Federal authorities started investigating gambling operations tied to organized crime. Frank's name appeared in documents. His associations became liabilities. He wasn't indicted, wasn't arrested, but the heat was on. Chicago wasn't safe anymore. So in 1968, Frank Rosenthal packed up and headed west to Las Vegas, a city where his talents wouldn't be wasted, where the outfit already had investments, where a genius with numbers could run an empire without ever holding a gun. He had no idea that Las Vegas would make him a legend, and that it would nearly kill him. The perfect frontman. When Frank Rosenthal arrived in Las Vegas in 1968, the city was transforming. Howard Hughes was buying up casinos, trying to clean up the mob image. The Stardust had just installed its massive neon sign. The Strip was growing. Behind the scenes, organized crime families from Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Kansas City were all fighting for their piece of the action. The outfit needed someone in Vegas who could manage their investments. Someone smart enough to run casinos, loyal enough to protect the skim, and clean enough to avoid scrutiny. Frank Rosenthal checked every box. In 1974, everything aligned. A young San Diego real estate developer named Alan Glick wanted to buy casinos but did not have the money. The Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, controlled by mob-connected trustees, loaned Glick $62.7 million. With that money, Glick formed Argent Corporation and bought 4 casinos: the Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Marina. Glick was the owner on paper, but Frank Rosenthal ran the show. Frank became an executive consultant to Argent Corporation, earning $250,000 a year, no gaming license, no official title, just complete control over 4 major Las Vegas casinos. And Frank didn't just run them, he revolutionized them. First, he created the race and sports book at the Stardust, the first fully integrated sports betting operation inside a casino. Before Frank, serious sports gambling happened in back rooms, in bookie joints, in illegal operations scattered across the city. Frank brought it to the casino floor, made it legitimate, made it glamorous. He installed massive boards displaying odds. He hired expert handicappers. He created an atmosphere where sports bettors felt like they were part of something exclusive, something professional. The Stardust became the premier destination for sports gambling in America, and every modern sportsbook in Vegas traces its lineage back to what Frank built. Second, Frank hired female blackjack dealers, the first casino on the Strip to do it systematically. Some people called it progressive. Some called it exploitative. Frank called it smart business. Revenue doubled within a year. Third, Frank demanded perfection in every detail. There is a famous story, confirmed by Frank himself, that he required each blueberry muffin baked in Stardust kitchens to contain exactly 16 blueberries. Not 15, not 17, 16 to the pound, no exceptions. If you got caught cheating at a table game, your hand got crushed with a rubber mallet. If you put your feet on a gaming table, you went out a window, not a door. If you insulted Frank or threatened him, you got beaten to near death while he stood over you, smoking a cigarette, sipping sparkling water. Frank didn't carry a gun. He didn't need one. His weapon was control, precision, fear through reputation. Everyone who worked for Frank knew that mediocrity was not tolerated. Excellence was the minimum standard. But Frank's most audacious move was his television show. The Frank Rosenthal Show, taped at the Stardust, was part talk show, part Vegas spectacle, part ego project. Frank interviewed celebrities, discussed sports, and presented himself as a legitimate businessman. Frank Sinatra appeared as a guest. It was the first time Sinatra ever did a talk show. Bob Hope came on. Wayne Newton, Liberace, O.J. Simpson. These were not small-time acts. These were legends sitting across from a man who ran 4 casinos without a gaming license, talking about sports and entertainment like Frank was Johnny Carson. The show was Frank's middle finger to everyone who said he did not belong. He was untouchable. He was brilliant. He was running Vegas his way. Behind the scenes, while Frank was perfecting muffins and hosting celebrities, a different operation was running. The skim was money flowing out of the Stardust count room to mob bosses in 5 different cities. 7 million, 10 million, 15 million. Nobody knows the exact number. Frank claimed he knew nothing about it, and legally, he was never charged. But the Nevada Gaming Control Board did not need a conviction. They just needed to know he was operating casinos without a license. In 1976, they told Frank he needed to apply for a key employee license. He refused. He said his job was entertainment and consulting, not gaming. They denied him anyway. Frank appealed. He won in state court. He appealed to the Nevada Supreme Court in 1980. He lost. Frank Rosenthal could no longer have anything to do with gambling in Nevada. But he did not leave. He kept hosting his show, kept working as entertainment director, kept pushing boundaries. Because Frank Rosenthal believed he was smarter than everyone else. And for a long time, he was right. But being the smartest guy in the room does not protect you when the second smartest guy is sleeping with your wife, the woman who destroyed him. Her name was Jerry McGee, and she was everything Frank Rosenthal thought he wanted. Blonde, beautiful, a former showgirl who had worked the Vegas circuit in the 1960s. She had that hard-edged glamour that only Vegas could produce, the kind of woman who looked perfect under neon lights and devastated in daylight. Frank met Jerry in the early 1970s. She was working as a cocktail waitress and part-time hustler, the kind of woman who knew how to work a room, how to charm a high roller, how to walk away with more money than she started with. Frank fell hard. They married in 1969. Frank gave her everything: a mansion, jewelry, furs, a lifestyle that most showgirls only dreamed about. They had 2 children together, a daughter and a son. From the outside, it looked like a Vegas fairy tale. The casino boss and his showgirl bride. But Jerry had a past. And in Vegas, the past never stays buried. Before Frank, there was Lester Diamond, a hustler, a con man, a charming piece of garbage who treated Jerry like property and somehow convinced her she could not live without him. Lester was the kind of man who borrowed money he would never repay, who promised things he would never deliver, who destroyed women because he enjoyed watching them break. Jerry never stopped loving him. Or maybe she never stopped needing whatever poison he represented. Even after marrying Frank, even after having children, Lester Diamond remained in her life. A phone call here. A secret meeting there. A relationship that should have ended but never did. Frank knew. Of course he knew. But knowing and accepting are different things. Frank tried to control it the way he controlled everything else in his life. He gave Jerry $2 million in cash. $1 million in jewelry. He thought money could fix it. He thought providing for her would make her stay. It did not. And then came Tony Spilotro. Tony the Ant Spilotro stood 5'5", weighed maybe 150 pounds, and was one of the most violent men the Chicago outfit ever produced. He ran the Hole in the Wall gang, a crew that specialized in burglaries and home invasions. He was sent to Vegas in the early 1970s to protect the outfit's interests, to oversee the skim, to make sure nobody stole from the people who were already stealing. Frank and Tony became friends, close friends. The kind of friendship where you trust someone with your life, with your family, with everything that matters. Tony betrayed all of it. The affair between Jerry and Tony started sometime in the late 1970s. The exact timeline does not matter. What matters is the betrayal. Tony Spilotro, the man Frank trusted to protect him, was sleeping with Frank's wife. Friends saw Jerry with bruises, saw clumps of hair missing. She told them Frank beat her. Maybe he did. Maybe the violence in their marriage went both ways. Maybe 2 damaged people destroyed each other in ways that left no winners. But the affair with Tony was not about love. It was about power. Tony taking what belonged to Frank. Jerry choosing chaos over stability. 2 people who should have never been together, destroying the one man who tried to give them both what they needed. Frank found out in the final years of the marriage. The details of how do not matter. What matters is that the friendship shattered. The marriage collapsed. And the 2 men who had built an empire together became enemies in a city where enemies do not survive long. Jerry spiraled. Drugs, alcohol, depression. She overdosed in 1982 in a Los Angeles motel room. Some said it was accidental. Some said it was suicide. Some said it was something darker. Frank never talked about it publicly. Never blamed Tony. Never blamed Jerry. He just moved forward the way he always did, calculating his next move, managing his losses, surviving. But the betrayal broke something in him. And in Vegas, when you're broken, they smell blood. The skimming machine, While Frank Rosenthal was perfecting blueberry muffins and Tony Splotro was sleeping with his wife, the largest casino skimming operation in FBI history was running full throttle at the Stardust. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Money came through the casino cage, cash from table games, from slots, from the sports book. Before it got counted for tax purposes, trusted men pulled it aside. They skimmed it off the top, undercounted coins by rigging weighing machines, and diverted cash through hidden routes and secret compartments. Then the money got transported to mob bosses in other cities. Chicago got $40,000 a month. Milwaukee took their share. Cleveland and Kansas City took theirs. Every family that had invested in Argent Corporation wanted returns, and Frank Rosenthal's casinos provided those returns. The operation was overseen by multiple people. Jay Vandermark supervised the slot machines. He compromised the coin-weighing equipment and made millions disappear into thin air. Counting room supervisors looked the other way, while bags of cash walked out back doors. Security guards who asked too many questions found themselves transferred, fired, or worse. Between 1974 and 1979, somewhere between $7 and $15 million was skimmed from Argent Corporation casinos. The exact amount will never be known, because the whole point of skimming is that it never gets recorded. Frank Rosenthal claimed he knew nothing about it. And here's the thing, he might have been telling the truth. Frank's job was running the casinos, maximizing revenue, creating innovations that made money. The skim operated above his head, controlled by people he reported to, not the other way around. If Frank had been involved, if they had evidence, the FBI would have charged him. They investigated for years. They had wiretaps, informants, and surveillance. They built cases against 15 other people connected to the operation. Indictments came down in 1983. Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Kansas City mob families all got hit. But Frank Rosenthal was never arrested, never indicted, never charged. He submitted himself to endless hours of interviews and answered every question the FBI asked. And when it was over, he walked away. Years later, Frank would say, "If I were guilty, I would have been charged. If they had something, they would have dropped the hammer on me." He was right. The FBI had suspicions. They had theories. But they never had proof. Frank Rosenthal ran 4 casinos without a gaming license, revolutionized the sports betting industry, and operated in the middle of the biggest mob skimming operation in Vegas history. And legally, he never committed a crime they could prove. But the Nevada Gaming Commission didn't care about proof. They cared about control. And Frank Rosenthal, with his mob connections, his refusal to get a license, his arrogance, represented everything they wanted to eliminate from Las Vegas. In 1976, they started the process of banning him. In 1980, the Nevada Supreme Court upheld the ban. Frank could no longer work in gaming in any capacity. His empire was over. His marriage was over. His best friend had betrayed him. And the FBI investigation had exposed the entire operation, bringing heat that the outfit couldn't tolerate. Frank should have left Las Vegas. He should have taken whatever money he had and disappeared. But Frank Rosenthal didn't run. He stayed. He kept hosting his television show. He kept living in his mansion. He kept acting like he was untouchable. And then, on October 4th, 1982, someone tried to prove he wasn't. When brothers betrayed Tony Spilotro's betrayal of Frank Rosenthal wasn't just about Jerry. It was bigger than an affair, deeper than friendship turned to hate. It was about power, greed, and the oldest story in organized crime, about a man who thought he was smarter than his bosses. Betrayal changed everything. Tony had been sent to Las Vegas to protect the outfit's interests. That meant protecting the skim, making sure the money flowed to Chicago without interruption, and keeping order among the soldiers and associates who operated in Nevada. But Tony saw opportunity. Opportunity became temptation. While the outfit was skimming millions from the Stardust, Tony was running his own operation, the Hole in the Wall Gang. They would break into homes, jewelry stores, businesses. They would steal whatever they could carry, fence it, and pocket the cash. Tony was making money on the side, money the bosses in Chicago did not know about. Worse, Tony started skimming from the skim, taking money that belonged to Chicago before it ever left Las Vegas. It was the ultimate betrayal, stealing from the people who trusted you to protect their money. Ultimate betrayal. The bosses noticed. They always notice. And when your value becomes less than the problems you create, there is only one solution. But before Chicago could deal with Tony, they had to deal with the bigger problem. Frank Rosenthal. Frank knew too much. He had run 4 casinos. He had been in meetings, had conversations, and seen faces. If the FBI ever flipped him, if Frank decided to cooperate, the entire operation would collapse. Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Kansas City, everyone would go down. Frank had to go, not to prison, not to retirement. He had to die. Nobody knows for certain who ordered the hit. Some say it was Tony Accardo, the Chicago boss who had known Frank since the beginning. Some say it was the other families, worried that Frank represented too much risk. Some say it was Tony Spilotro, tying up loose ends. What matters is that on October 4th, 1982, someone put a bomb under Frank Rosenthal's Cadillac, and that bomb should have killed him. The bomb, October 4th, 1982, started like any other day for Frank Rosenthal. He woke up in his Las Vegas mansion. He went about his business. He had dinner at Tony Roma's restaurant on East Sahara Avenue, a place he had been to dozens of times. It was dark when he left the restaurant, the kind of desert darkness where the neon of the strip glows miles away, but the parking lots stay shadowed. Frank walked to his 1981 Cadillac Eldorado, the kind of car that said you had made it, that you were somebody. He did not check under the car. He did not look for anything suspicious. Why would he? This was Vegas. He ran this town. Frank got in, closed the door, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. The bomb exploded. The fireball lit up the parking lot like a second sun. The blast wave shattered windows in nearby buildings. Witnesses said they heard the explosion from blocks away, a thunderclap that shook the ground. Frank screamed, "They are trying to kill me!" He screamed it over and over as he crawled from the burning wreckage, his clothes on fire, his body broken. Paramedics arrived. They did not think he would survive. The car was a mangled hunk of burning metal. Nobody walks away from that kind of blast. But Frank did, survived. The only reason he lived was dumb luck. His specific Cadillac model, the 1981 Eldorado, had a metal plate under the driver's seat, a structural reinforcement that most cars did not have. That plate absorbed just enough of the blast to keep the shrapnel and fire from killing him instantly. Frank spent weeks in the hospital, burns, broken bones, trauma, but he lived. Nobody was ever charged. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police investigated. The FBI investigated. They knew it was a mob hit. They knew it was connected to the Stardust operation, but knowing and proving are different things. Frank knew who ordered it. He never said publicly, but he knew. And for the rest of his life, he carried that knowledge, a debt that could never be collected, a betrayal that could never be avenged. Because you don't get revenge on the mob. You survive, and you disappear. Or you don't survive at all. The aftermath. Frank left Las Vegas 6 months after the bombing. He took his 2 children to California, then to Florida. He ran a sports bar in Boca Raton called Crocs. He worked as a consultant for offshore sports betting companies. He lived quietly, carefully, always watching over his shoulder. Jerry McGee had died 2 months before the bombing. November 9th, 1982, in a Los Angeles motel room. Heroin and alcohol. Officially ruled accidental, but Jerry's life had been falling apart for years. The drugs, the chaos, the men who destroyed her. Frank never remarried. He raised his kids alone. He tried to give them a normal life, as normal as life could be when your father survived a car bomb and your mother died of an overdose. Tony Spilotro wasn't so lucky. In June 1986, Tony and his brother Michael were lured to a meeting in Indiana. They thought they were getting promoted, given more power. Instead, They were beaten to death with baseball bats and buried in a cornfield. The outfit's final accounting. The end of Tony the Ant Spilotro. When authorities found the bodies, Tony's skull was fractured. His ribs were broken. He had been beaten so badly that dental records were needed to identify him. The men who killed him made sure he suffered. Frank heard about it. He did not comment publicly. He did not attend any funeral. He just kept living his quiet life in Florida. In 1995, Martin Scorsese made Casino, based on Nicholas Pileggi's book about Frank and the Stardust operation. Robert De Niro played Sam Ace Rothstein, the brilliant casino manager with mob connections. Sharon Stone played Ginger McKenna, the troubled showgirl wife. Joe Pesci played Nicky Santoro, the violent enforcer. They changed the names and called the casino the Tangiers instead of the Stardust. But everyone knew what they were watching. Everyone recognized the count room scenes, the car bombing, the personal betrayals. Frank said De Niro's portrayal was about a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. Close, but not quite perfect. He would not comment on Sharon Stone's version of Jerry. Some wounds do not heal. The movie made Frank famous again, not as a casino executive, not as a sports betting genius, but as a character. A symbol of the old Vegas, the mob-controlled era when violence and glamour existed side by side. Frank lived another 13 years after the movie. He died in 2008 of a heart attack. He was 79 years old. He had outlived Jerry, outlived Tony, outlived most of the people who had tried to kill him. His obituary called him a sports handicapper and casino executive. It did not mention the mob, it did not mention the skim, it did not mention the bomb. The legacy. Frank Rosenthal never held a gaming license. He never officially ran a casino. On paper, he was a consultant, an entertainment director. Just another executive hovering near the action when major decisions were made. In reality, he reshaped Las Vegas. The integrated sportsbook Frank built at the Stardust became the blueprint for modern sports betting. Walk into any casino today and you will see massive odds boards, plush seating, analysts breaking down games in real time. That entire experience traces back to Frank. He pulled sports betting out of back rooms and alleyways and turned it into a centerpiece of casino culture. Then, there were female dealers. Something completely normal today, but revolutionary at the time. Frank hired them first, proved they were just as capable, and showed the industry that performance mattered more than tradition. And then, there was his obsession with detail. From perfectly prepared blueberry muffins to rigid standards of excellence, Frank demanded precision in everything. That mindset still lives on in elite casino operations. The best resorts do not tolerate mediocrity because Frank proved that guests notice when you care about every small thing. But Frank's true legacy is not found in innovations. It is found in what he symbolized: the end of an era. Frank ran Las Vegas when the mob still controlled it, when skim operations moved millions in cash, when violence and business were inseparable, when one man could effectively run 4 casinos without a license and remain untouchable. That version of Vegas no longer exists. Corporate ownership, strict regulation, surveillance technology, every modern safeguard was designed to erase what Frank represented. The Nevada Gaming Commission's war against him was not personal. It was strategic. They understood that as long as men like Frank held power, Las Vegas would never shed its mob reputation. So they forced him out, made an example of him, and slammed the door shut. By the 1990s, it worked. The mob disappeared. Corporations took over. Wall Street funded expansion. The Strip transformed from a gangster playground into a global entertainment empire. Frank lived long enough to watch it happen from Florida, watching Steve Wynn's Mirage, Kerkorian's MGM, and theme parks replacing smoke-filled back rooms. Whether he regretted leaving, no one truly knows. He always denied involvement in the skim. He claimed his mob ties were social. Maybe he believed it. Maybe it was survival. Or maybe Frank knew exactly who he was and simply did not care. Because in the end, he survived. The car bomb failed. His enemies did not. And for a man who lived that close to violence, surviving might have been the greatest victory of all. That was Frank Rosenthal, a Vegas legend who beat the odds and left a city forever changed.